The threat of nuclear war has been making humanity nervous ever since the weapons were developed. First, the whole world was shocked by the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During the Cold War, the governments of the Soviets and the States taught their societies how to properly hide from a nuclear bomb on television. When the Soviet Union collapsed, both within the country and beyond, everyone was concerned about nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands. Also, nuclear powers told the population about the peaceful atom. As with many military inventions, governments wanted to apply nuclear technologies to civilian life. In addition to nuclear power plants, for example, they wanted to launch a series of cars with a nuclear engine. Ford Nucleon in United States and Volga Atom in Soviet Union. Somewhere between stories of peaceful atom, accidents happened at Chernobyl, Fukushima and 3 Mile Island. These are just the biggest accidents. In essence, these philosophical thoughts, saying, in case it happens, we will not even realize the impending end, have been haunting people all over the world for almost 80 years. But there's another reason for anxiety that the media seems to bypass. And the name of this reason is Pakistan, which possesses nuclear weapons. Economic crisis, explosive demography, catastrophic flooding of 2 years ago, separatist movements right on the border with the Taliban, huge debt to the International Monetary Fund and China. Such a set of difficulties is facing Islamabad right now, and in the interests of a huge region which is covered by the potential range of Pakistan's nuclear missiles, it is to help this country not to collapse. Lines on the map. One of the key problems of Pakistan is unfriendly neighbors. It all started with that same map of the British General McMahon, which we talked about in the video about the Chinese expansion in Asia. This line, drawn at random without considering the interests of the region, became a stumbling block not only between China and India, but also between India and Pakistan. And it's the same region, the highland Kashmir. For a very long time, Indians and Pakistanis lived together in one state, British India. In the year 1947, the British Empire ordered to live long, and the English left these lands. Immediately, the old divide between Sikhs, Hindus and Muslims was revealed, and the peak of the arguments came to the large Kashmir Principality, which was ruled by the Hindu Hari Singh. He recognized Indian sovereignty, which according to the Indian Independence Act adopted by the British Parliament, he had every right to do. Together with Singh in the Indian Union were all his subordinates, including the Muslim majority, which, for obvious reasons, Pakistan considered its own. The Indian army came to the principality. The situation became deadlocked. On the side of India was a British act, and the decision of the lawful ruler Singh. On the side of Pakistan was the principal right of peoples to self-determination, recognized by the United Nations back in year 45. So already in the 47th year, Pakistan declared war for the region. The Pakistani army managed to conquer a third of the Kashmir region, after which a peace agreement was concluded. The Pakistanis made a second attempt in 65, thinking they had gathered enough strength for revenge. The clashes at the border escalated into large-scale military actions with the use of tanks and aircraft. Then it was possible to negotiate a ceasefire again with the help of the Soviet Union. Council of Ministers Chairman Alexei Kosygin flew to Tashkent for talks. Then, in 1971, another Indo-Pakistani war occurred, which was not essentially about the Kashmir region, but it affected it as well. Thus, a serious enmity began between western and eastern Pakistan. In the east, Bengali uprisings were raging, which were supported by India. As a result, East Pakistan turned into modern Bangladesh, and the Pakistani army suffered a painful defeat. During the war, another 10,000 people gave their lives for the disputed region of Kashmir. Under pressure from the United States of America and Soviet Union, India did not pursue its military success and withdrew troops from the occupied Pakistani territories, and then agreed to return more than 90,000 prisoners of war. In 72, the countries agreed not to violate the so-called control line, which to this day replaces the normal, clearly established state border. As they say, greetings to General McMahon. In 2003, both countries acquired nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. Recognizing the gravity of new confrontations, the countries started pursuing diplomatic solutions. But as if ignoring nuclear warheads, the neighbors managed to get involved in a border conflict in 2019. The Indian Air Force, for the first time since 1971, crossed the border with the Pakistani army and attacked targets on Pakistani and Kashmir territory. The attack, presented as a preemptive strike against terrorist camps, turned into an air battle. As a result, the Pakistanis took their planes into the air and one MiG-21 of India was shot down and one F-16 of Pakistan. The Kashmir border conflict escalated, involving shootings, minefields, artillery fire. And it ended after a few weeks with more promises never to do it again. In addition to nuclear weapons, Pakistan is also known for its cyber troops. Islamabad's infrastructure has regularly been subjected to attacks by hacker teams from neighboring India, as well as attacks by international cybercrime groups. And something had to be done about it. One of the key projects was the Pakistani Cyber Army, which was called upon to resist attacks, as well as to carry out offensive operations. The Pakistan Cyber Army project, launched in 2018, is being implemented in collaboration with Turkey, which allows Islamabad to strengthen its position in the field of cybersecurity. The IT sector is also actively developing in Pakistan. Today, more than 2,000 companies are operating in the country, employing over 300,000 English-speaking IT specialists. Pakistan also has 13 technology parks where software is being developed. Every year, universities prepare over 20,000 information technologies engineers and programmers. Not without the participation of information technology specialists, in 2014, scientists from the University of Colorado modeled the consequences of a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan. The scientists assumed that each side would launch about 50 atomic bombs, which is approximately half of each country's nuclear potential. According to the scenario, the power of each bomb is 15 kilotons in trinitrotoluene equivalent. Approximately this much energy was possessed by the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Computer modeling methods paint a terrifying picture of the world after a regional apocalypse. As a result of the firestorm that will arise in the cities, 5 million tons of soot will enter the atmosphere. Reaching the atmosphere, the soot from the burned people, petroleum products and buildings will become a kind of screen that will cover the Earth's surface from the sun's rays for 9 years. This will lead to the lowest average temperatures on Earth in the last 1,000 years. Winters will become on average 2.5 degrees Celsius colder. Summer temperatures will be 1.4 degrees lower. In the conditions of a nuclear winter, frosts will shorten the vegetation period for plants by 40 days. Crops will not have time to ripen. Atmospheric warming will lead to a loss of 15 to 20% of the ozone layer over populated areas. This will increase the flow of ultraviolet solar radiation in the summer by 30 to 80%, which will cause enormous damage to people's health, agriculture, and marine ecosystems, which provide more than 30% of the animal protein consumed by people. A decrease in atmospheric temperatures and a lack of sunlight will result in the cooling of the ocean to a depth of 100 meters. This process will create a long-term heat deficit. In the Arctic, the area of sea ice will increase by 10 to 15% over 4 to 7 years. The territory of ice in Antarctica will increase by 20 to 25%. As a result, the temperature of the water in the ocean will continue to decrease even 26 years after a local nuclear war. This implies that fishing industry volumes will also decline. All the above-mentioned factors will lead to a severe food crisis on the planet. Billions of people will starve. Such are the consequences of exchanges of blows only between two countries in the Asian region. Of course, it's impossible to call this conflict fully resolved, but at least the war axe between Pakistan and India, if not buried, is not being used for its intended purpose. But the situation with the northern neighbors is much worse. Here, another British general, Mortimer Durand, drew his bloody line. The Durand Line, as it came to be called, literally cut through the territory of the Pashtun tribes. The border became a constant headache for the English. The Pashtun tribes on both sides of it were ready to rise up at any moment, especially if enemy Britain and the state armed them. Pakistan inherited this problem from British India. Practically from the first years of the state's existence, the Pakistani elites, mainly from the Punjab and Sindh provinces, had to deal with the Pashtun issue. The popular Pashtun party, God's servants, maintained close ties with the Indian National Congress, agitated against the partition of British India and the very existence of the state of Pakistan. At the same time, Afghanistan was against Pakistan's admission to the United Nations, justifying this with an unresolved territorial dispute, and demanded Islamabad to move the border to the Indus itself. After being refused, the Afghans backed Mirza Ali Khan, who declared the formation of Pashtunistan in Pashtun-populated areas of Pakistan. Islamabad managed to suppress this separatist movement, but Kabul still demanded territorial concessions, arming and financing the separatists. The situation remained unresolved, with militants from various radical groups constantly being armed on the disputed territories. Obviously, the Pakistani government did not like the news about the possible arrival of the Taliban to power in Afghanistan. Back in the 2017, Pakistan began the hasty construction of a full-fledged border. 2 fences made of metal mesh, topped with barbed wire and equipped with surveillance cameras and infrared motion sensors. Work on them did not stop even during the pandemic. The Pakistanis hurried as much as they could and still did not have time. About 10% of the borderline remained unfinished. Not long before the new year, a sniper from the Afghan army, already a Taliban one, shot 2 Pakistani soldiers who were pulling a barbed wire. In response, the Pakistanis fired at the border Afghan villages. The Taliban artillery responded immediately. Summing up, the situation between Afghanistan and Pakistan does not look good. In January of 2024, Iran and Pakistan exchanged rocket attacks. The targets of these attacks were named as bases of separatist groups fighting for the independence of Balochistan, a region on the border of Iran, Pakistan and Afghanistan, the majority of whose population is made up of Baloch people. This is a people of the Iranian group, the representatives of which mainly profess Sunni Islam. The lands of Balochistan are rich in gas and valuable minerals, yet it is one of the poorest and least developed regions economically. In this region there are militants that Iran and Pakistan consider to be a terrorist threat. First Iran and then Pakistan launched rocket attacks against them. As you've already understood, Pakistan is surrounded on all sides, if not by enemies, then certainly by ill wishers. But we haven't told about the last one, the northeastern neighbor, Chinese interest. For Pakistan, the Middle Kingdom is really what it is, because the border crossing is one of the highest in the world. It passes through the Kunjara Pass, which is located at an altitude of 4,600 meters above sea level. The border connects the Karakoram Highway, which passes through the disputed territory of Gilgit-Baltistan. The dry port of Sust is located on this highway. This city holds a strategic position. All passenger and cargo transportation through the Pakistan-China border pass through it. From here begins the trade chain that runs through the entire country, which is part of the One Belt, One Road project. And it is a very important part as it gives China trade variability with direct access to the Arabian Sea, making the celestial economy less dependent on trade through the Malacca Strait. By the way, such an initiative greatly annoys the Indian government, adding fuel to the fire. In 2013, when construction began, China declared that Pakistan is the key link in its multi-trillion initiative Belt and Road, and the Pakistani corridor is the most important asset. The scope of cooperation was extensive, including the construction of a deep-water port in Gwadar, a car and railway line from this port to the Xinjiang province in the west of China, to help Pakistan overcome the electricity deficit, modernize its transport networks and transition from a predominantly agricultural economy to an industrial one, with investments in mining, agriculture and even science and education. Nothing surprising, you say. As usual, China has pumped a lot of money into a promising asset. Yes and no. The aforementioned Arabian Sea exit is an advantage, but investments in Pakistan can also disappear without a trace. In year 2017, China Overseas Port Holding Company leased the Gwadar port for 40 years, making China simultaneously an operator and developer. Although conceptually it was reasonable, frequent attacks of those same white whales aimed at the corridor's infrastructure and especially the Chinese made the completion of construction and operation along the route an unrealistic proposition. Their opposition stems from the fact that Chinese projects have significantly benefited provinces that are already more developed. Moreover, after the Chinese built the Dasu hydropower station, local workers also became subject to attacks by radicals. Xi Jinping commented on this matter. "We hope that the Pakistani side guarantees the safety of Chinese institutions and personnel in Pakistan. And this is despite the fact that in Pakistan special military formations of 10,000 people were created to protect Chinese workers. In the end, all this pleasure costs an enormous amount of money, which Islamabad owes to Beijing. 10 years after its grandiose launch, the complex project of the Chinese infrastructure network, stretching 3,218 kilometers, is still limited by scattered investments in energy and transport infrastructure projects without any investments and technology transfer in industry or agriculture to increase productivity and exports. The final long-term stage comes in 2026 to 2030. But considering the slow pace of work, uncertain political stoppage, and growing skepticism from both sides, it is likely that most projects will remain frozen. Therefore, considering the escalating financial crisis, Pakistan probably has only one way left. And there's one train for them to take anyway. Economic collapse. All these growing conflicts on the borders can ignite the main headache of Pakistan: economics. In 2013, the external debt was estimated at $20 billion. The debt jumped 22% compared to the previous year. The debt is roughly divided between China and the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund has already demanded to increase the tax burden on Pakistanis, so that the government could pay off the debts, which, as you understand, only exacerbates the situation in the country. Things are also complicated with China. If there is no money for payments, then you will have to pay with political interests, as it happens with other regions of the world. Strongly with and without a weakening economy, horrific floods hit in 2020. Due to heavy monsoon rains, the government had to declare a state of emergency. The disaster caused damage to 33 million people, a third of all residents, destroying 1.6 million homes, and the damage was estimated at $10 billion. In addition, the death toll is 1,325 people, and the most terrible thing is that the flood has covered territories where about half of the country's food products are produced. The water destroyed 90% of the crops, so a real threat of famine looms over Pakistan. Moreover, in April 2024, the floods hit Pakistan again, albeit with less force. But this is not the last threat to the economy. While politicians in many countries, including the United States of America and European Union, are struggling to increase birth rates amidst annual declines, Pakistan is experiencing explosive demographic growth. Even way too explosive. According to the British census of 1911, only 19 million people lived in this territory. In 1954, there were 34 million. According to the census of 1998, 131 million. But according to data from 2013, there were 241 million Pakistanis. That's the 5th place in the world in terms of population. The fact that a huge part of the population is very young people, the demographic boom continues. It is assumed that 4 out of 10 Pakistanis are under the age of 14. As a result, according to the World Bank, by the middle of the century, the population of Pakistan will be 335 million people. Despite frequent devastating floods, the previous ones being in 2010 and 2013, Pakistan paradoxically suffers from water scarcity. The near-total dependence on the Indus River threatens the stability of the entire country, which is also one of the most water-stressed in the world. Project 706. There's a feeling that disaster is simply inevitable. Sooner or later, the economy will collapse, and nuclear weapons will fall into the hands of one of the radical movements. The question arises, how did nuclear warheads get there in the first place? We go back to the year 1971. Relations between Pakistan and India reached a critical peak. As a result of India's involvement in the conflict between West and East Pakistan, the world received such a glorious place as independent Bangladesh. The world was then pleased with this fact, but the Pakistanis not so much. India began to surpass them in industry, military power and population by leaps and bounds. The radical decision to which not only India's leadership came at that moment, but also Pakistan's, was to create nuclear weapons. But the top of Islamabad did not know how to solve this problem. But an unknown Pashtun of Indian origin with Pakistani citizenship already had a plan. Even more surprising, he was in the Netherlands at that moment. Abdul Qadir Khan was born in 1936, and after the partition of India, his family moved to Pakistan, where he received a decent education specializing in physics, mathematics, and metallurgy. After this, Abdul moved to Europe, where he received as many as 3 higher educations in the field of metallurgy, first in the Federal Republic of Germany, then in the Netherlands, and later in Belgium. European education as well as a Dutch origin wife secured him a job at the FDO. This is a subsidiary of a German corporation, Urenco, engaged in the development of peaceful atom. The company used gas centrifuges for uranium production, a unique technology that only it and the Soviet Union had at that time. Abdul's choice of location was highly successful. End of the 20th century. Everywhere there are American, Soviet, and Chinese spies who are trying to find out and steal the technological developments of competitors. Everything is strictly guarded, especially enterprises related to the nuclear industry. But Abdul turned out to be an extraordinary Pashtun scholar. With years of work, he became the owner of countless secrets of that time, and they didn't even start to suspect him yet. In year 74 in India, the first tests of a nuclear bomb, Smiling Buddha, took place. And in Islamabad, nuclear physicists did not budge from a dead point. Then Abdul Khan decided finally to send a letter to Pakistan, where he briefly outlined his thoughts on the beginning of the path to a real nuclear project. At that time, the government of Pakistan was trying to solve the problem in an honest way. They ordered the construction of nuclear reactors from France. But at some point, amidst the tensions between India and Pakistan, the French realized that their project would clearly be used not only for peaceful purposes, and they halted construction, leaving the Pakistanis with nothing. Therefore, Abdul Khan was arranged a meeting with Prime Minister Bhutto, and they grasped the scientist's idea as a last straw. At the beginning of 75, the Pakistanis began to purchase the necessary equipment. And finally, the Dutch intelligence services woke up. After all, the Pakistanis bought everything from the same companies as the FDO itself, where the Pashtun scientist worked. The investigation quickly learned about the failure of the FDO security services and soon made a decision about Khan's arrest. But the politicians got involved in the matter. The Dutch cabinet, fearing a resonant scandal, sanctions, and a blow to the country's economy, ordered the special services not to touch the Pakistanis so that the information would not leak to the media. The funniest thing is that they didn't even fire Khan or deport him. They just transferred him to a position without access to classified information. Moreover, Dutch intelligence officers consulted with their colleagues from the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Americans approved the actions of the local intelligence, assuming that the Pakistanis would not get anything out of it due to their mediocre industrial base. After being transferred to a useless position, Khan decided to return to his homeland, preemptively grabbing some classified documents. The only vigilant FDO worker who had noticed the Pakistani scientist raised the alarm. He turned to the special services, where he was asked to leave for understandable reasons, and he was even fired from the FDO. Then the scientist spilled everything to the press and a grandiose scandal broke out. The scandal forced the government to confirm the fact of the theft, and Abdul was sentenced to 4 years in prison in absentia. The absurdity was that when Khan decided to visit the Netherlands again, it turned out that his case had disappeared and he could move around the country freely. The judge who handled the case blamed the Central Intelligence Agency for creating this ridiculous situation. In Pakistan, Khan became the leader of a project to create a nuclear bomb. He had a huge budget, the trust of the government, and all the necessary knowledge. But the Central Intelligence Agency was right. Pakistan really couldn't produce the necessary components. And buying everything that is needed openly is also impossible, due to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons agreement. But Abdul Khan knew where and what to look for. He created an entire network for purchasing the necessary equipment and materials in Europe and America. Using old acquaintances, he found suppliers who began to unload goods in Pakistan through subsidiary companies in Dubai. But in such a complex business, there couldn't be without excesses. Several deals in Germany and the United States of America were exposed, and the scholar fell into the crosshairs of the Central Intelligence Agency. Under the crosshairs, it was discovered that unexpectedly in remote Pakistan, a complex of enrichment enterprises had already been built, and according to the forecasts of the Central Intelligence Agency, this should have taken another couple of decades. The intelligence went up, and in 1979, President Jimmy Carter imposed sanctions against Pakistan. And again, Islamabad was lucky. The Americans almost immediately lifted the sanctions because Pakistan was a key ally for influencing a much more important Afghanistan for America. In the 80s, the sanctions in the modern world with global trade worked very selectively. The Americans tried to remove the trade chains, putting pressure on European companies that sold equipment, but they responded that the sales were not going to Pakistan. On paper it was so. In 87, Project 706, as they called Pakistan's first nuclear bomb, was successfully completed. The first prototype of the warhead was assembled. Abdul Khan, however, wanted to get even more results from his chains and supplies. He started selling tech and equipment to other countries such as Iran. And in the Central Intelligence Agency, they were still sure that the network operates exclusively for Pakistan. They say that the nuclear leak of information to Iran happened exactly then. This whole story with the supplies only ended in 1999 when the Central Intelligence Agency, in search of a source of uranium enrichment technology, came across Khan's agents in Iran. It was the Swiss Tinner family. It turned out that Abdul had sold centrifuges to Iran, and it was he who sold materials for nuclear projects to North Korea and Libya. Apart from the Tinner family, who leaked all the data over the network, no one else paid for the nuclear affair. The Swiss received real sentences, while Khan was under house arrest and a television confession, but he was already a hero of Pakistan, so doing anything with him seemed impossible. Since then, it can be asserted that Pakistan has gained some certainty on the political arena. Now the conflict with India has become something of a geopolitical conversation. The two nuclear-armed countries began to tread carefully and solve problems diplomatically between each other. But some time has passed. And now Pakistan is in a completely different point. Economic collapse and huge debts, tension with radical groups on the borders, flooding. Pakistan's neighbors have to wonder about their future next to a nuclear bankrupt. Well, we have to tell about other interesting events and personalities in future videos on our channel.